But we begin at the White House, where President Trump just hung up the phone with President Xi. They had a call. It's unclear exactly how long it lasted. We don't get official readouts most of the time anymore. We find out about them on Truth Social, unless the Chinese beat the president, which is what happened today. Bunch of headlines. About an hour later, the president posted this: "I just completed a very productive call with President Xi of China. We made progress on many very important issues, including trade, fentanyl, the need to bring the war between Russia and Ukraine to an end, and approval of the TikTok deal. I also agreed with President Xi," check this out, "that we would meet at the APEC summit in South Korea, and that I would go to China in the early part of next year, and that President Xi would likewise come to the U.S. at an appropriate time." The call was a very good one. The president says he'll be speaking again by phone. Appreciate the TikTok approval, and both look forward to meeting at APEC. Now, I don't know how you're reading this, but what TikTok approval are we talking about here? Because, see, first he says that we made progress on many very important issues, including approval of the TikTok. That doesn't sound like we closed the deal, but then later refers to it like it happened. That's why we need to bring in Tyler, because, well, she's at the White House and knows more than we do about it. By the way, they talked about a lot more than TikTok. Bloomberg's Washington correspondent on a beautiful day in the nation's capital on the North Lawn. Tyler, is there a deal for TikTok or not? I felt like maybe I got it wrong.
No, Joe, I think you're reading this correctly, because really all that we have gotten from the White House's side of this phone call is this post from President Trump alluding to this progress made on the deal, but we've yet to see any sort of finalized details when it comes to what that framework will ultimately look like. Bloomberg News, of course, has been reporting that the structure of this deal very likely will include an outside consortium of U.S. investors. Combine that with the existing U.S. investors in the company, and ByteDance's share, its stake, is going to shake out to less than 20%. Of course, all of this in a bid to try to satisfy that national security law that Congress ultimately passed. But still big questions here whether or not this is actually getting done. We did hear a little bit from this from the Chinese readout of the call, according to Chinese state media. Xi Jinping alluding to the fact that he's going to take the business interest in mind here of the different companies that are negotiating, but also no word yet on how the algorithm is going to shake out. We know that that is a very big sticking point here, in particular to satisfying that national security provision of the law passed by Congress. And then, Joe, you hit the other big redhead on the Bloomberg terminal. That basically, this call confirmed what we had been expecting, that this was largely seen as a precursor to perhaps the bigger meeting, which is going to take place at the end of October at the APEC summit in South Korea, setting up a face-to-face meeting between the two leaders. President Trump also saying that he's looking forward to visiting China at the beginning of next year. You mentioned, of course, a lot of headlines that we could pick into this, but Will's mentioned, he said they made progress on trade, they made progress on fentanyl. Of course, 20% of the tariffs still in place against China tied to fentanyl concerns. But Joe, our analyst at Bloomberg Economics ahead of this call had pointed out that, yes, any progress on TikTok would be considered good progress, would be considered momentum, but we really have seen few signs from negotiators that they have made significant progress when it comes to addressing some of those core concerns from this White House in the U.S.-China trade talks.
Fascinating. How long do we have to wait until the APEC meeting? When will these two men be in the same room, Tyler?
Yeah, so this is the end of October, the last week of October, coming actually, Joe, important to note, right before the deadline for the tariff truce to expire. That deadline is November 10th. We did hear President Trump yesterday allude to the fact that he's considering extending that deadline, and that's because they still have a lot of issues to work out here, and perhaps we'll get some more tangible deliverables after they meet face-to-face. Just a couple to throw on your radar to see if we got any sort of movement as we learn more details from this call. One, of course, the pressure on NVIDIA. President Trump mentioned in this post that they talked about Russia perhaps alluding to China's imports of Russian energy supplies. The top importer, in fact, of Russian crude makes up about 47% of Russian crude exports go to China. But lastly, Joe, to put on your radar, new data showing us that Beijing did not order any U.S. soybeans so far this export season, which started a few weeks ago. That is a really important thread to pull on here. We know that market access for U.S. goods, in particular agricultural goods, is going to continue to be at the forefront of this conversation, and we'll see if we get any sort of momentum as we now push ahead to that APEC summit.